you're here for the first time, gather the info. If you're here for the second time, make sure you just study his techniques. Greg Koukl.
Thanks, Craig. I want to start by first making a prediction and then making a promise in a few minutes. The prediction is this. So we only have about 50 minutes together here, and that's not very much time for what I want to cover. But I still think that this 50 minutes that we spend here could be a game changer for a lot of you. And what I mean by that is that if you take to heart the things that I'm going to offer you, kind of in sum, it's just a kernel, but if you get the picture of what I have in mind here, this can change everything for you in the way you engage other people for the claims of Christ. Now, I'm saying that, and it makes me a little uncomfortable, actually, to make the prediction, because I am not trying to draw attention to myself. That's not really my purpose here. I'm trying to draw attention to an approach that has, for many people, been a game changer for them. And I know that because they've told me. There are people in this room that have told me that very thing, that this material has changed everything in terms of their approach to engagements. And it's also been a game changer for me. Now, I'm just going to skirt across the top of a basic concept. The details are here in the book. Tactics, the subtitle, a game plan for discussing your Christian convictions. In other words, it's going to give you a tool that will allow you to maneuver. And that's what this is all about. Now, I'm just going to whet your appetite a little bit. I also found out that this is one of 2 books that are left, so at least on the back there, but you can get it from Stand to Reason and at Amazon and whatever good books are sold, you know. But I love doing conferences like this, and I do a considerable number, partly because I like to sit in the audience and learn from the smart guys, like Bill Craig was just up here a little while ago, and Paul Copan before, and a whole raft of really, really bright people that do the heavy lifting thinking-wise. But there's also a liability to this kind of a conference, is that when you're sitting in like Thursday night and Friday night, and now most of the day Saturday, you start feeling like that guy in the Far Side cartoon. Remember that guy who's in the math class and all the equations are on the board, and he raises his hand and he said, "Professor, could I please be excused? My brain is full," you know. You ever feel like you're getting overwhelmed with all this information? But there's another problem with it, and that is you're wondering, now after I leave here, how am I going to get this information into play in conversations with other people? So there's something missing oftentimes in conferences like this, a missing bridge. A bridge from the content to the conversation, or from, shall we say, the scholarship to the relationship, okay? And many times, just like in this case, I get asked to come in and do a final session to provide you that bridge, to give you a way, a plan, a method of getting things into play. But before I tell you that, I want to lay a foundation of a perspective about how you go about this. I'm going to say something now that is actually somewhat controversial, and I've had some people push back on it pretty strongly against me. But I'm going to stand behind it, and I'll give you my reasons for it. Here's what I'm going to say. I almost never have it as a goal whenever I initiate a conversation, or I'm thinking about having a conversation with someone that I hope will have a spiritual impact. Like the guy who was sitting next to me on the airplane coming over here 5 days ago. I almost never have it as a goal to lead that person to Christ. Now, do I want that person to come to Christ? Of course I do. Do we need the gospel for that person to come to Christ? Absolutely. It's the power of God to salvation to everyone who believes. But nowadays, and I don't have time to get into a lot of detail, but let me just tell you, and you already know this, many of you, nowadays, you can't just jump right into the simple gospel, because the simple gospel is not simple anymore. Not to a whole lot of folk. They don't get it anymore because they don't have the background. And when you start talking about the simple gospel, the things you say, the words you use, the phrases that come out are the kinds of things that people have a negative attitude towards, oftentimes. They associate a lot of bad things with that kind of message, and so you're in a fix. And what's necessary now more than ever before is what Francis Schaeffer used to call pre-evangelism. So I am mindful of the fact that I can't start at the end with most people. I have to start, well, somewhere else, way before, laying a foundation. And here's where an insight that I had maybe 15 years ago helped me tremendously. And that insight is this: before there can be a harvest in any person's life, in any individual's life, before there can be a harvest in that person's life, there has always got to be a season of, well, let's just call it gardening, okay? Before there can be a harvest, there has got to be a season of gardening. And when I realized that, when that kind of began to sink into my own mind in terms of my engagements with other people, and also noticing that the culture is getting increasingly hostile to our message, which doesn't mean we be silent, that we pull back, but we adjust and adapt as good ambassadors now to try to make the message more clear to a new generation. I don't mean necessarily more palatable. I don't mean taking the offense out of the gospel. I mean communicating the true gospel in a way that's least offensive to the people we're engaging, okay? And I have this in mind now. I came out of the Jesus movement, and boy, that was you just go right to the gospel and you pray to receive Christ, and that's the way we did things, but things are different now. And in fact, if I told you I was going to give you a technique that would allow you to help people to pray, receive Christ, and that was kind of the end game, you'd smile and you'd say, pray the Lord, and you'd take notes, and then you would do it. And the reason that you wouldn't do it is because the idea of pressing somebody, especially in our culture now, to that point, you just realize, boy, there's conflict coming. And that puts you off, and I understand that. And so instead of getting involved, you stay on the bench. And we need you. But the reason you're on the bench is because you're thinking of the harvest. And you're not thinking of the gardening. Now, as I look back on my life, 43 years now as a Christian, I think most of what I do, to be honest, when you think of radio or speaking or books or whatever it happens to be, I think most of what I've been doing is gardening. And there are probably people in this audience, I talked to a few of you who I've kind of gardened in your life. And then that gardening brings you to a point where somebody else is there to do the harvesting when the fruit is ripe. And you know, Jesus talks about this in John chapter 4 with the woman at the well. And I've read this many times, but I hadn't noticed this particular thing until a few years ago. You know how it is, you read, and then one day this thing jumps out that's always been there. And it's after the conversation with the woman at the well, the disciples come up to Jesus, and Jesus says, you say there are 4 months and then comes the harvest. I say to you, look on the fields, they are ripe with harvest. Now, I do not think, as a matter of interpretation here, I don't think that Jesus is saying that every field is always ripe for harvest. That just is obviously not the case. But that particular field was, and when he says it's white for harvest, he's probably looking up and seeing the crowd of people that the woman at the well is bringing from the city of Sychar, the town of Sychar, with their white robes coming across the field to the well to talk with Jesus. Look, there's the harvest. And he says, you are about, listen to the words, you are about to reap where you did not sow. You are about to reap where you did not sow. You're going to get the easy pickings. Somebody else did the hard work, maybe the woman at the well, I don't know. But you're going to get the easy pickings, the ripe fruit, and when the fruit is ripe, it just falls into the basket, right? But it's the gardening that makes the harvest possible. And then Jesus says this. You can check it out in the passage. He said, so that the one who sows, the gardeners, and the one who reaps, the harvesters, can rejoice together. Wow. One team, one field, 2 seasons, 2 kinds of workers. Now, some of you here are harvesters, and you love that. And I'm glad for that. Praise God. We need you, obviously. But there's a whole bunch of you who really don't fit into that mold, and you think there's no place for you. And I have a suspicion that you're not harvesters, you're gardeners. Because the gardening season is a lot longer than the harvesting season. And therefore, we probably need more gardeners than we need harvesters. And as a result of that insight for me, I have changed my goal. My goal, whenever I engage with anybody, and this was last week, or when I get in the airplane tonight, fly back. I don't know what's going to happen, who I'm going to sit next to. I'm not a guy that is always banging on every person I sit next to about the Lord. That's just not my style. But my attitude is, Lord, the servant of the Lord. I'm your servant. So I want to be available. I want to keep my eyes open for opportunities. So I don't know what's going to happen. But if I do get in a conversation, I'll tell you what my goal is. My goal, as I mentioned earlier, is not to lead that person to Christ. I don't know where that person is at. My goal is not to harvest. My goal is to do some what? Gardening, okay? And so consequently, I have a different bottom line, what I'm after. And I give that every time I speak at a non-Christian audience, a university or whatever. And here's what I say. I say, I'm here tonight because my life has been deeply changed by an ancient teacher. His name is Jesus of Nazareth. And 40-some years ago, when I was a student at UCLA, I really began to think more about the claims that Jesus made about the world and about himself and the claim he made on my own life. And after thinking about it a lot, and asking a lot of questions, and pushing back a lot, I finally came to the conclusion that Jesus got it right, that he saw the world the way it really was. And therefore, I decided the smartest thing that I could do is to fall in behind him. No, so this is what I'm telling the audience. But I want you to know that I'm not here to convert you tonight. I have a more modest goal, I tell them. I just want to put a stone in your shoe. Okay? I just want to annoy you in a good way. And they all, like you're chuckling now, they chuckle at that because they figure the Christian's there to annoy them, right? And I say, okay, I'm your guy, but you're going to thank me when we're done. I mean, that's my goal. I want you hobbling out of here thinking about something I said because I really am convinced that Christianity and Jesus of Nazareth is worth thinking about. And then I go into my lecture, whatever it happens to be. But now I've just communicated to my audience what my goal is, and that's the goal in any circumstance that I'm in. So I want to commend this to you. As kind of a bottom line goal, instead of thinking I have an obligation to swing for the fences every time you get up to bat, got to hit a home, got to score, got to get him to sign on the dotted line, that's not my attitude at all. Is there occasion for that? Yeah. People sometimes ask me, well, when do you get to the gospel in your system? Do you ever get to the gospel? I say, sure I do. Well, when? And here's what I say. I get to the gospel whenever I want. And the point there, I know it sounds a little cheeky, but the point I'm making is that I am not artificially constrained to push to the end game before the time, at least in my assessment with that individual. Think about Jesus. Did Jesus always get to the gospel? Did he always get to the good news? You read through the Gospels, guess what you get? Bad news. You get a lot of bad news from Jesus. Okay, 2 greatest commandments? Try those on for size, for example. Oh, the Sermon on the Mount, that's great ethical teaching. Yeah, that section ends, you are to be perfect as my heavenly Father is perfect. Good luck with that, right? This is not good news. This is bad news. So Jesus didn't always get to the end game, so to speak. And I think we should have the freedom to adjust to the individuals. All right, that's what I'm after. I'm not trying to stay away from the tough stuff. I'm just trying to be wise. And here I'm going to make a promise. Remember I said before I'll make a prediction and then I'll make a promise. So here's my promise. I just got, I got like 30 minutes left. Here's my promise. In the next 30 minutes, I'm going to give you a game plan that will allow you to converse with confidence in any situation, no matter how little you know or how knowledgeable or aggressive or even obnoxious the other person happens to be, all right? It's a game plan that trades, I think, somewhat on a directive that we see in Colossians chapter 4, verse 5 and 6. And this is Paul writing. Here's what he says. Conduct yourself with wisdom towards outsiders, making the most of the opportunity. In other words, be smart. That's what I was referring to a few moments ago. Just not everybody's in the same spot, all right? Conduct yourself with wisdom towards outsiders, making the most of the opportunity. Let your words always, or your speech always be with grace, seasoned as it were with salt. So be smart, be nice. How about that? What a concept. So that you know how to respond to each person. So that you know how to be smart, be nice, be tactical. Be willing to adapt and adjust. So let me show you how this worked out in my own life a number of years ago now. It's probably about 15 years now I think about it, to be honest. My staff says don't use numbers when you speak because it makes you sound senile. So, sometime in the distant past, I was in northern Wisconsin, and we have some property up there because I grew up in Chicago, and my grandpa bought this for retirement, and so I'd go up as a kid, and we call it a cabin, but it's really, when I say cabin, you probably picture something that's not this place, okay? But it's our place, right? And so I like to fish. I'm a bass fisherman. 1 month out of the year I get to do that. And so this particular year I went up, and I caught the largest smallmouth bass of my life at the time, 4 pounds, 2 ounces, which is a big smallie for that neck of the woods. Now, I just got to tell you, I've got 8 fish over 5 since then, just saying. But I was really happy with that. I got the pastor who was with me in the boat, took a picture. It's before my digital days, so I wanted the film, remember that stuff? The film to get processed so that I can get that picture up in digital form and put it on the screen at his church where I'd be preaching the following weekend, and I could kind of flex my fishing muscles. Those folks in the Northwoods care about that kind of thing. So we dropped off the film there at a counter, an overnight film deal, and there was a young lady there with a pentagram hanging from her neck. Now, a pentagram is a 5-pointed star. It's oftentimes an occultic symbol. This was large, and it looked like a statement, so I asked her about it. I said, does that jewelry have religious significance? And she said, yes, it does. The 5 points stand for earth, wind, fire, water, and spirit. Now, the bells are going off a little bit in my head, and this is familiar, but I had another question. I said, does it have significance religiously for you personally? Some people wear a cross, and it's just jewelry. And she said, yes, it does. I'm a pagan. Now, I'm a trained professional, right? So, I'm just taking this in stride, but my dear wife was standing next to me, and she heard this woman call herself a pagan, and it caught my wife by surprise, and she started to chuckle. And then she caught herself. She said, I'm really sorry. I don't mean to be rude, but I never heard anybody admit it before. That kind of She'd only heard the word pagan when her girlfriends would call her kids in, get in here, you bunch of pagans, that kind of thing. So, well, the woman wasn't offended. She said it's actually an earth religion, and she went on to explain a few things. And very quickly, I realized I was talking to a witch. And in fact, I asked her, are you Wiccan then? And she said, yes, I am. And then she explained, we respect all life. That's a basic tenet of their theology. And I said, well, if you respect all life, that would make you pro-life, right? With regards to the abortion question. And she said, no, I'm not pro-life. Actually, I'm pro-choice. I said, isn't it odd for a witch to be pro-choice? I mean, my understanding is most witches are pro-life, okay? And it just struck me as surprising. And she said, well, yeah, most of them are, but... And then she qualified her own view. She said, I could never do that, referring to abortion. I could never kill a baby. Now, this is very interesting because, it stands to reason we train about abortion and we make the case philosophically and scientifically that abortion takes the life of an innocent human being, baby killing if you like, but we tell people not to use that kind of language because we don't want it to look like we're trying to make progress with rhetoric, baby killer, that kind of thing. But in this case, I'm not the one who's using the baby killing terminology regarding abortion. It's the pro-choicer that's using that. So if you get nothing else out of this session, I hope that you get the conviction you got to what? Listen, pay attention to what other people say because they're going to give you information that you can use in your conversation. She has just identified abortion, her view, pro-abortion, as baby killing. So in this conversation, am I going to use the word abortion anymore? No, I'm going to use the word she just gave me, baby killing. She says, I could never do that. I could never kill a baby. And then she gave the reason why. She said, I wouldn't want something bad to come back on me, okay? It's like a karma thing. What goes around comes around. But when you think about it, isn't that kind of an odd reason not to kill babies? I'm not going to kill any babies. You never know what's going to happen to you when you start killing babies, Maybe it's just a good idea not to kill babies. I don't know, regardless. But I didn't pursue that. I said, well, maybe you wouldn't kill babies, but maybe we should stop other people from killing babies. And she said, reflexively, automatically, I guess, I think people should have a choice. Now, what is the choice that we're talking about here? On her own words, the choice to do what? to kill babies, of course. And so that's what I said back. You mean people should have a choice to kill babies? And she said, well, I think everything should be taken into consideration. I said, okay, what would be a legitimate consideration to make it okay to kill a baby? And she immediately said incest. Okay, now I want you to see what's going on here. She is trotting out all of the pro-choice slogans, right? Boom, 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 boom. But she has already admitted that abortion kills babies, so all of these slogans for choice are now explicitly slogans for baby killing. And I'll just tell you, it's starting to sound a little bit weird. But she doesn't see it because she's not listening. She's trotting out slogans. People do this all the time on both sides of the aisle. We trot out slogans. We don't have conversations. We don't discuss issues. We trot out slogans. And now she's going to see how she's gotten herself in trouble, because now I have another question. And I said, do you mind if I ask you a question? She goes, what? I said, if I understand your view correctly, if I had a child, a 2-year-old, say, standing next to me who had been conceived by incest, then on your view, I should be allowed to kill this child. Is that right? Now, let me ask you something. Is that a fair application of the view that she's expressed to me? What do you think? Yeah, I think it is too. And so does she. By the way, if it wasn't a fair application, you notice how I'm giving her an opportunity to correct me. Okay, now you got my view correct. No, but that was her view. But it got her thinking, and she paused. Maybe this is when I put a stone in her shoe. I don't know. You never know about these things. You do the best you can, and you leave it to God kind of thing is what it amounts to most of the time. Well, all of the time, actually. But in this case, so she's thinking, and finally she says, I'd have mixed feelings about that. And I'm thinking, I hope so. I'm glad they're at least mixed. Now, she did say it as a concession to me. She'd kind of gotten stuck. Now, look at the line is building behind me, all right? And so I realize at this moment, think about it. Now, I'm interfering with her work product. She can't do her job. And I realize my opportunity as an ambassador has come to an end. Think about it. If I had a different view about how this project works, I might have turned around and said, hey, folks, I haven't got to the gospel yet. Sit down, shut up, you might learn something, you know. But I didn't have that pressure. I was given a window of opportunity. I took what I was given in the moment, and then I moved on. I did a little what? Gardening. And then I entrusted that person to the Lord, and she's his problem anyway. She's my task for the moment. She's his problem. And he cares a whole lot more about her than I did. And my wife and I prayed for her afterwards, and we committed her to the Lord. And I want you to see something about that illustration. In that conversation, I asked 9 different questions. I asked questions to introduce the conversation. I asked questions to gather information from her. I used questions to exploit what I saw as a weakness or a flaw in her view. And then in my notes here, at this point, it says, and she was doing most of the work. When I looked over my notes, I thought, well, she wasn't doing most of the work, because that sounds like I was doing some of the work, but I wasn't doing some of the work. She was doing all of the work, because I was relaxed. And so I changed my notes. And then I thought about it. Wait a minute. She wasn't doing any work either. We weren't having a fight. We weren't banging heads. There was no lines drawn in the sand. We didn't have our dukes up. We were just having a friendly conversation, and that's exactly the way I want it to work. And this shows the power of a tactical approach. Now, it stands to reason we have lots of tactics. You find them in the book. They have names like suicide and taking the roof off and just the facts, ma'am, and steamroller and Rhodes Scholar. And these are all maneuvers in conversation that will help you. But there is one tactic that is kind of let's just call it the queen mother of all tactics. It's the one I use more than any other. It's the easiest tactic imaginable to stop a challenger in their tracks, to turn the tables and put you in the driver's seat, which is the goal of the tactical approach. You want to be in the driver's seat. Not to manipulate, but to manage. Not to coerce, but to control in an appropriate way. And this tactic has a name, and the name of the tactic is Columbo. named after the infamous Lieutenant Columbo. Now, I know in a mixed audience, I'm going to have some people who don't know who Columbo is, especially if there's younger ones, but I see a lot of gray heads here. So I know that you know, 3 or 4 decades now ago, the Lieutenant Columbo wore a trench coat kind of like this, looked like he slept in it. Maybe he did, I don't know, but I got mine at a Salvation Army. My wife is the garage sale queen and the Goodwill queen, and so she says whenever you buy anything at a place like that, you always got to check the pockets because you never know what you're going to... Wait a minute. What's this? Oh my gosh, look at that! Wow, how'd that get there? Lieutenant Columbo has a cigar. Right now, this is just a plastic. Was this a Baptist church? This is just plastic, okay? No worries. I hate cigars. Every time I get one, I destroy it by fire. Completely, because I don't want anyone to stumble, you know. Columbo also has a pad of paper, but he can't use his pad of paper. Why? He doesn't have a pen or a pencil. He's got to bum a pencil off of somebody, you know. I mean, this guy shows up in the crime scene, and he's walking around mumbling and muttering to himself and scratching his head, and he doesn't look like he can think his way out of a wet paper bag. He's stupid. But he's stupid like a fox, right? Because he's got a plan. At some point, he'll pause and put his fingers to furrowed brow like he's deep in painful thought, and then he'll say something like this. I don't know. There's something about this thing that bothers me. Do you mind if I ask you a question? You asked that question, right? Oh, thank you. You're very intelligent. One more thing. And then he one more tings them to death, right? With question after question, and pretty soon people start getting annoyed and bugged. And he said, I'm sorry, it's because I'm asking all these questions, but I can't help it. It's a habit. And this is a habit that you ought to get into. The key to the Columbo tactic is that as a Christian, you go on the offensive in an inoffensive way with carefully selected questions to advance the conversation. Let me say that again. The key to the Columbo tactic is that you go on the offensive in an inoffensive way with carefully selected questions that advance the conversation. Now, there are 3 different ways to use questions. That is, there are 3 different steps to the use of the Columbo tactic. And remember that the Columbo tactic is your game plan. And what this means then is when you show up at a situation, whatever that situation may be, you sit down on the airplane next to somebody, you meet with friends at an event, you have school buddies you get together with, wherever it happens to be that you want to have a spiritual impact, possibly, with a goal to put a stone in their shoe, you want to employ your game plan, and that is you want to take the first steps. The Columbo tactic has 3 uses. I'm only going to talk about 2 of them today because that's all the time I have left, and that's all that I need to fulfill my promise to you. Okay, there's more, is what I'm saying, a lot more, but I'll give you the basics, okay? The first use of Columbo is to gather information. To gather information. All right? In other words, when you find yourself in a circumstance where you want to make a difference, what is the first thing you think about doing? You don't think about jumping to the gospel. This is my suggestion, at least. The first thing you have to do is you have to get the lay of the land. You need to get some intel. You got to figure out what's going on. So I'm sitting next to a guy named John on the airplane, and I start talking to John, and I'm drawing him out, and I'm using my game plan. And really, I'm not even sure whether we're going to get to anything spiritual. I'm just making small talk. I'm just being friendly. That's one of the nice advantages of using questions. They're good manners, right? You're showing an interest in another person, okay? And by the way, when you're using questions, it also keeps you in the driver's seat. That is, your questions will help direct the conversation wherever you want it to go. And in this case, all I'm doing is gathering information. And I find out, because he asked me what I did for a living, and I talked a little bit about that, so he knows I'm a Christian. And he says, I used to be a Christian. Let me ask you something. Is that valuable information for me to know? Duh. Wow. And then he says, in fact, I used to be a preacher's kid. I said, John, how do you used to be a preacher's kid? Did your dad die? He said, no, my dad's still alive. It's just my dad's no longer a preacher. Oh, okay. And my dad's no longer a Christian. Oh. Is that good information for me to have? You think there's some baggage sitting next to me here on the airplane? Could you imagine if I would have kind of jumped in with a simple gospel presentation without being careful, like Paul says, to know how to respond to each person? What would his response have been? Been there, done that, and it hurt, right? But in this particular case, because I'm drawing him out, and all I'm doing is listening as he's dumping on me about all of his experiences, bad experiences in the church, I'm just listening. And I'm not getting offended. He's not mad at me. He's mad at a bunch of other Christians. I'm just listening. And what's happening is I'm getting a picture of his, in a sense, his spiritual, theological topography. And the lay of the land. And I realize there are minefields out there. And I have now been able to maneuver around the minefields so I don't set them off. Okay? Why was I able to do that? Because I had a game plan that got me going, and now I'm just listening. I don't know if it's going to go anywhere. And many of these conversations don't go anywhere. Now, some people have different temperaments. They're going to want to push the river a little bit, and if that's your style, then that's up to you. I'm not telling you how to do all of this stuff. I'm just telling you something that's really worked well for me and that I think will work well for a whole bunch of other people who are still sitting on the fence. I'm just gathering information and seeing if there's an opening, okay? Now, there's a model question you could do to accomplish the goal of gathering information. And that model question is some form of the question, what do you mean by that? What do you mean by that? Now, this is very, very broad. That is, it can be voiced in lots of different ways. Notice in the witch in Wisconsin, I saw the jewelry she's wearing. And I asked her a question. I said, what do you mean by that jewelry, right? Does that jewelry have religious significance? It's the same kind of question. I just adapted it there, okay? And so sometimes that what do you mean by that question is going to be just a casual question that allows you to draw the other person out and see if there might be any avenues you might pursue with other questions to steer things in a spiritual way. Okay, so that's the first way that's used, the first use of Columbo. Here's another way, though, and this is, let's say you're already engaged in a conversation with somebody, and so spiritual things are on the table. What you're going to see a lot of times is people are going to make claims about things that have ambiguities built into them. That is, there are things that they say which requires more explanation to be clear on exactly what they mean. So somebody might say, well, look at Christian, everything's relative. Everything's relative. So you see how the attempt to claim everything is relative is meant to undermine our claim to truth. And sometimes the Christians now stonewalled. Oh, now what? Now what do I do? And it's a tough spot to be in. How do I prove that everything's not relative? Well, I think you've gotten ahead of the game if that's where you're at. I have a suggestion. Ask a question. Which question? The first Columbo question. You want to gather some more information. And what question might that be? Well, some form of the question. Help me out here. The first question. What do you mean by that? Okay, audience participation time. Okay, good. You get a star. Some of you. So how would that look in this situation? I'm going to say, what do you mean by relative? Okay? Now, I wrote a book on relativism. I know what relativism is, but I don't know that that person who says everything's relative knows what relativism is. I want to hear from them. And I have another question, too, after they've explained that, if they're able to. They said everything is relative. What do you mean by everything? Now, this might seem really obvious. What do you mean? Why are you asking that question? Everything means everything. Come on. Well, if everything means everything, then isn't the statement everything's relative part of everything? Well, some of you are chuckling because you see a problem emerging there. You see the suicide tactic trying to insert itself. Because if everything is relative, then the statement everything's relative is also what? Relative. Okay, now you got some difficulties there. Now, what have I done as a Christian at that point? Have I argued a point? Have I made a case? No, I've just asked a question. But I'm going to tell you a secret about this first question. And the secret is that when you ask for clarification of a person's point of view, and there's lots of examples I have of this in the book, lots of ways to do this. I do it in every conversation, and if you listen to the radio show that I do, the podcast, and I hope you do, I'll tell you more about how you can do that later. But you'll see me doing this kind of thing. People come at me with some point, and I'm asking clarification questions, okay? And sometimes when I ask, what do you mean by that, I'm going to get what I call the Simon and Garfunkel response. Remember those guys? That great duo back in the 60s, 1966 to be exact, in this case, who wrote a song called The Sounds of Silence. And that's what I hear oftentimes when I ask a simple question, what do you mean by that? Or some variation. I get the sounds of silence. Now, why would there be silence, for goodness sake? They don't know what they mean. It's exactly right. The fact of the matter is, most of the people you talk to will express beliefs that they have not gained through the process of thinking about them, but they have been socialized to believe. They absorb them from their community. By the way, this is true with non-Christians and Christians. Not thought through things, this is just the way we believe, okay? And so when you ask for a characterization of what you mean, you're going to get sounds of silence, okay? So don't be surprised. Don't let them off the hook. Just let them sit there and let them think about it and try to make sense. And sometimes your question all by itself will force them to be more clear about what their own point of view actually is. And you've made progress when you do that. I'm just telling you, and some of you who've used the technique probably realize this. Sometimes you make really substantive progress simply by forcing the other person to think more about their own view. It's just amazing how that works out, okay? And what have you done? You just asked a basic question, what do you mean by that, okay? Now, there are lots of circumstances in which you can use this. Somebody says, well, you're forcing your view on me. Okay, my response is, what do you mean by that? That is, exactly how am I forcing my view on you right now? It's a question, right? Well, you think you're right, and I ought to believe the way you believe. Now, by the way, do you think that when I talk about things like this, that I think I'm right? Yeah, of course I do. If I didn't think my beliefs were true, I wouldn't believe what I believe, right? I believe something else and believe those were true. But I'm not the only person in the conversation who believes his beliefs are true. He does too. I'm the only one being faulted for it. And so I'm going to use questions, and this is a more advanced use of the tactic to kind of help him to see that, do you think your views are true? Or that's the question. Do you think your views are right? What's he going to say? No, I think all my views are wrong. It's not going to happen. But he thinks his views are true. I think my views are true. So then what's the problem here? Why am I being faulted for that? I'm not trying to force anything. I'm trying to persuade. But notice how I got into that point. I have the point in my mind that I want to make. I got into that point by using questions and using questions to get him to think. How exactly am I forcing my view on you right now? So there's just a little feel for how that can work. It is tremendously flexible. It gets the person into play right away. You're having a conversation. You are actually in control of the conversation because you are asking the questions. And it's genial, it's friendly. You're in a learning mode. You have not made any decisions about where you're going from this point because you're still gathering intel to see if there's any place else to go, all right? And I have a basic rule. I do not want to get in a fight with people, okay? Here's the rule. If I get mad, I lose, all right? What if I don't get mad and they get mad at me? Okay, if they get mad, I lose. How about this? If anybody gets mad, what? I lose, right? Because people who are angry are not in a position to receive ideas and change their minds. And incidentally, this is a very good principle for marriage. Just saying, okay? At no extra cost right there, all right? So here, I've gotten somewhere. What have I done? I've initiated a conversation. I'm drawing the other person out. I'm interacting. I mean, this is great. Very simple question. What do you mean by that? Or some variation. Now, there are limits to this. So, gentlemen, if your wife calls you an idiot, don't say, what do you mean by that? She might just, elaborate a little bit. There's a second step to the game plan. And the second step to the game plan, first one, you're gathering information. The second step, I'm calling it reverse the burden of proof. reversing the burden of proof, okay? Now, what do I mean by the phrase burden of proof? Many of you have heard about this before. Let me just clarify. The burden of proof is the responsibility someone in the conversation has to give reasons for their view. It's the responsibility someone has to make a defense or give reasons or prove a view. Now, who is it in any conversation who bears that burden? Very simple rule. The person who makes the claim bears the burden. The person who makes the claim bears the burden. So, if you say that something's so, and especially if it's controversial, then it's entirely appropriate for you to say, for a person who says something so, to give reasons why they think it's the case. Now, let me tell you why this is important in terms of the tactical maneuvering for Christians. For far too often, we've been faced with somebody who makes a claim against our view of some sort. And then we have taken the responsibility on ourselves to refute the claim instead of letting them defend the claim first. So what we've done is we've given them a free ride. We've let them off the hook. All they got to do is say whatever they want. And now we're stuck, okay? And now what? Now what are we going to do? We have taken the responsibility on ourselves. We've given them a free ride. And what I'm here to say is no more free rides. All right? In the immortal words of Ricky Ricardo. Who's Ricky Ricardo? They got a lot of splaining to do. All right? They've got the splaining to do, so we need to make them do their own splaining about their own view, is the idea. And we can do that by using another question. And so this is the second maneuver, or the second use of the Columbo, the second step of your game plan. It's called reversing the burden of proof. And the question that we use is, now how did you come to that conclusion? Now how did you come to that conclusion? Or some variation. What are your reasons for that? Why do you think that's the way it actually happened? And see, what we're trying to do here is we're trying to prevent somebody else from just inventing a story, telling a tale, a bedtime story that's meant to put your own view to bed. And people tell all kinds of tales. And these things have great rhetorical force. They seem very compelling when they tell the tales, but they still have to take another step. They have to defend those. I'll give you an example. I'm very close to being out of time here, but let me read to you some comments that were made by a guy. I was at KFI, which is the CBS affiliate in Los Angeles, huge talk station, and this is the shock jock talk station, and I was defending intelligent design. It was an interview I was a part of. And somebody called in and started invoking Big Bang cosmology against me, all right? And I explained that, and I know this is controversial with Christians, but the Big Bang is actually on my side. Because to put it simply, and here I'm going to save you a lot of expense, all right? And probably I'll cost Bill Craig a lot of royalties, but I'm going to give you the Kalam cosmological argument in one sentence. Is Bill gone? Good. Okay. Just checking. A Big Bang needs a Big Banger. There it is. Kalam cosmological argument writ small, you know. Big Bang needs a Big Banger. It's pretty common sense, right? Well, this guy says, no, you don't need a Big Banger to do a Big Bang, and here he's going to tell me how you can get something for nothing. So here's what he says. He says, well, I don't think it is, because you could start with a base of nothing, and you could say that there was nothing but an infinite continuous moment, and eventually one tiny, little, insignificant thing happened. A point happened in the nothingness. Well, that's the problem, isn't it? How do you get a point in the nothingness, you know? But he just asserts it, right? Well, maybe it's a really small point, so it's easier. I don't know. And then the point expanded, which is extremely simple. It requires no intelligence, so no intelligent God had to intervene. All we need is a little tiny imperfection in the perfect nothingness. By the way, if nothing, no thing, can't have an adjective, just so you know. So no thing can't be perfect. Notice how there's a tendency to take nothing and treat it like something. This happens all the time in these conversations. So it can't be a perfect nothingness. Nothing is just no thing. Anyway. And the imperfection expanded, it became variegated and increasingly complex, etc. And so then he got the planets and everything spinning out. Now, I got to answer this guy, and I'm in LA. I'm thinking, he's on drugs. Well, how would you answer that? I mean, that's pretty tough, all of this stuff. What do you do? But I noticed something that he said, and I pointed it out to him. I said, you notice how you started? You started by saying, you could say that, and then you told a story. I said, you're right. You can say anything you want. But giving us reasons to take what you say seriously, that's another thing entirely, and that's your job. It is not my job to refute the story. Get this. It is not our job to refute the story. It is their job first to defend it. And this is where our second Columbo question comes in. Now, how did you come to that conclusion? What are your reasons for that? That kind of thing. And wait and see what happens. Now, do not be surprised, by the way, when people make a strong statement about something and they're very confident of it and their sails are filled with their own self and their own ideas, that when you ask them, now, how do you come to that conclusion, don't be surprised if you get Simon and Garfunkel again. I've seen it time and time again, the sounds of silence, and I see all of the wind go out of their sails, and their sails start to flap. Now, I'm not trying to embarrass them. I'm not trying to make it hard. I'm just asking a question. Now, how did you come to that conclusion? And I'm waiting to see if they have anything to say, and much of the time they don't. Now, that's not always the case. Sometimes people are up to speed on either question, but you will be amazed how often people have nothing to say to those two questions. Now, I want you to just think about those questions for a moment. Well, they're very simple to do. They're easy to initiate a conversation. There's no pressure on you because you're not making any claims, right? If you're not making any claims, if you're not saying it's so, anything so spiritual, then you have no responsibility. You're safe. There's a tremendous amount of safety here, but you are actively involved in what could easily be a very friendly conversation that's, without you making a case, still gets the other person to think and still can put a very big, stone in their shoe. I want you to see the capabilities here, the practical possibility of just what I've offered. You do not have to swing for the fences. You do not have to even get on base, in my view. All you have to do is get up to the batter's box, and these two questions will help you to do that. What do you mean by that, and how did you come to that conclusion? Now, I want you to know that Stand to Reason as an organization is here for you to help you do all of those kinds of things better. We are one player among many that are represented at conferences like this, but when we are happy to be joined in arms with our brothers and sisters who are kind of in the enterprise, in the fight, if you will. But we want to build a relationship with you. And many, I've talked to you, we already have been building a relationship over time. Now, there's a couple ways that we do that. One of them is the radio show and the website. The website for Stand to Reason, the acronym is STR, so the website is simply str.org. Very simple. We have thousands of pages of information on our website, and I mean literally thousands, and I mean literally, okay? We have hundreds of video vignettes that will help you maneuver in conversations. We have two apps, a standard app and a quick study app. They're both for free. You can download them on your phone and keep up with our stuff. There's even a quick study section just for the tactics material. So if you want to refresh and review that, go to the App Store and you get our apps, no cost. You can also apply for, or rather sign up for our podcast. I do 3 hours a week of podcasts in various forms. 3 hours, that's just like, that's one LA commute, you know? So it's not burdensome. And what you will see if you listen in is how I take these notions and I put them in play in conversation with people. So that's str.org. The second thing we want to do is we want to send you free training material every single month. That's what this card is for. If you grab this card, most of you have been given one of these cards. Why don't you grab it? And if you didn't get one, you can get one in the back there. There's a perforation in the middle. If you bend it at the perforation and tear it off, the blue card is a thumbnail sketch of the Columbo tactic. So this is a little reminder that'll help you. The white card, that's for you. You keep that. The white card is for me, okay? If you tell us where you live, and we need your address, name and address, and your email address, we will send you free training material every single month. You will get our bi-monthly newsletter, Solid Ground. My promise to you is that you will not find in Solid Ground pictures of our staff at bake sales. Okay, it's not that kind of a newsletter. You're going to get a solid article that's going to help you deal with something, whether it's a theistic evolution or whether it's gender confusion or whether it's whatever. You know, it's something up to date that's going to help you, okay? But we need to know where to send it. And so if you send us your address and your email address, we can send it to you virtual. And if we know where you live, then when next time we're in your environs, we'll send you an email and say one of our speakers is giving a talk, and you can come by that too. So if you take a moment right now and fill this out, that will be helpful. And I'll tell you what I'm going to give you for that. We have a little book that's probably our best-selling booklet. We don't have it on the back right now, but usually at Stand to Reason events we have them. A little booklet called Jesus the Only Way, 100 Verses. A little red booklet we charge $2 for. Okay, this is meant to show on this controversial issue about Jesus being the only way that this is what Jesus actually claimed for himself, and everybody that Jesus trained to follow after him said exactly the same thing. So we put the burden on Jesus. Okay, that's what that booklet is. It has 9 lines of scriptural argument about why Jesus is the only way. Well, we went and we collapsed that into a single quick reference card, Jesus the only way, all 9 lines of argument, some of the verses printed out, and then a lot of the references for other verses. We want to give that to you. It's not for sale. We just want to give it to you in exchange for your card. So this is basically our first step of giving you training material that will help you to be an effective ambassador for Christ. And there's a table over there in a corner, so when you fill out that card, just take it over to the corner of the table, and they'll give you your copy of Jesus the Only Way, quick study, okay? And if you don't have a thing to fill out, they'll have some more of those there. Listen, if you remember nothing else from our time together here, well, before I say this, let me make an observation. I fulfilled my promise to you. My promise was to give you a game plan that will allow you to converse with confidence in any situation, no matter how little you knew, or even how aggressive or knowledgeable or even obnoxious that the other person was. And now I've done that. I've given you 2 questions that you can use anywhere. And you can be a great conversationalist with no pressure on you at all. And you'll be amazed at how much God will do with just those 2 questions. If you remember nothing else from our time together, always remember this. Take a tip from Lieutenant Columbo and always what? Ask questions. Thank you.